You're listening to the Apple Insider Podcast.
Welcome to this, the 127th episode of the Apple Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Victor Marks, and joining me is Neil Hughes.
Victor, how are you?
I am amazing. Today, I'm a little verklempt. Today is a very special anniversary for us here at Apple Insider. It is. Today is the 6th anniversary of Google+.
Oh, man.
I'm choked up because, Google Plus was revolutionary. Google Plus took all of these disparate Google offerings. It took Photos. It took Google Plus, the social network, which came out of the ashes of Google Buzz. It took YouTube. It took Hangouts. It took everything, and it combined every Gmail account into this one platform across all the services and all of the offerings. It revolutionized what a digital hub that Google has been for us. And this June 29th, where we're recording this, is the 6th anniversary. And Vic Gundotra brought it all forward for us.
I realize you're being facetious because, for those listening, this is actually the 10th anniversary of the first iPhone. But before we get to that, I will say
everything. I was going to have fun with that.
I will say that Google Plus does have a special place in my heart, and not ironically, because about 5 years ago, when I got married, at the wedding, we used Google Plus for people to share and upload photos so you could have a collection of photos privately in the same place. And so this was before Facebook events was like really a big thing, or now everybody uses like hashtags on Instagram to be able to find all the pictures. So what we did was we printed up cards that were at everybody's place setting at the reception, but also like went out in a email that went out prior to the ceremony as well. And it was like, here are the instructions. And what was funny was I wrote, Google Plus is kind of like Facebook, except nobody uses it. Because I was explaining, to a bunch of people that have no idea what any of this
what is the concept of Google Plus.
Right. And so, basically we used it there, and it worked out great. We got thousands of photos from all the people that were in attendance at the wedding, and it was a really great. And now like I said, everybody's just got Instagram hashtags and stuff like that. But this wasn't that wasn't as much of a thing back then. And Google Photos in Google Plus was actually kind of ahead of its time. It was the one feature of Google Plus that was actually very good.
So Google Plus set out to become the better than Facebook, and that was their actual stated intention, was we're going to be like Facebook, but better. Mm-hmm. And the better part was that they said, in Facebook, you're one person and all of your friends are all equal friends, and they can all see what each other sees, which doesn't work. And their example was this really sort of embarrassing example, right? They said, what if you're a school teacher and you're friends with your students, but you're also friends with your friends from the bar?
Mm-hmm. And
you don't want your students seeing your friends from the bar because you'd like to stay employed.
And Facebook eventually added all these features anyhow. And the truth of a social network is the features don't matter if there's nobody there.
Yes. Yeah. That's literally called the network effect, right?
Yes.
and so Google Plus's standpoint was that you'd separate your lives into these different circles, and you'd have your circle of bar friends and your circle of students, and they would never meet. And of course, it totally worked out for them because no one put anyone into circles, and therefore they absolutely never met. But Photos still does this cool thing where they do the remember when, the throwback pictures, mm-hmm. and they'll assemble neat montages for you out of the pictures that you have. Mm-hmm. To the point where if you had a bunch of pictures taken in rapid succession, they'll even turn that into an animated GIF.
Right.
And the inventor of it calls it GIF.
I don't care.
I know you don't.
Well, let's talk about something that people actually do use, and that's the iPhone.
Right. So, this is interesting. And we've had 10 years of iPhone mm-hmm. today. And you and I both used and both still have the original iPhone. Mm-hmm. For me, it's no surprise because I have all kinds of old technology that no one cares about and is defunct, including, of all things, would you believe that I have the Pearl backup camera license plate frame plate thing that was done by Form-Op engineers?
Oh, well, there you go.
I have one of those things.
Boy.
Yeah. Very cool product, by the way. It's too bad that it hasn't worked out for them. But the iPhone did work out. So the iPhone set a number of different revolutions in motion. The iPhone was based on things that existed before it, obviously, but at the same time, it put them together in a way that was unique that we hadn't had before. You know, we'd had touchscreens before. We'd had capacitive touch surfaces before, which Apple bought in order to make the touchscreen. The TouchWorks guys made keyboard replacements for Macs that used capacitance touch and could do 10 fingers at a time. We had app stores before. I had a Nokia phone with an app store on it. But none of these things were actually human approachable. They weren't very good. And at the introduction of the iPhone, I knew I had to have it. When I was at Macworld when it launched, it was clear that it was absolutely the next phone I was going to have. At the same time, I had a manager that I worked for back then who insisted that he was never going to get an iPhone, that it wasn't ready for consumption because it didn't have picture messaging. It didn't have MMS, therefore it wasn't okay.
Right.
And he eventually came around, but to my great embarrassment, he put up a blog post on the company blog stating why he was not going to get an iPhone.
Well, and it's important to remember for people too that first iPhone, as revolutionary as it was not exactly a breakout success. It took a few years really for Apple to get to the point where it was a phenomenon. I think they sold 1 million iPhones in the first year. That first design was only ran on 2G networks. It was slow internet. It didn't have messaging capabilities. It didn't record video.
No, stop right there. You say slow internet, but you have to remember that before that, we were on GPRS. My Nokia with an app store was on a GPRS network. That was slow internet. The 2G network was fast for the time.
Well, that was actually what I used and that was my 10-year piece that I published today that people can see on AppleInsider. My first experience with the iPhone was I was on T-Mobile. I had been a customer since the voice stream days because it was cheap. And so I waited until the iPhone not only dropped in price by $200 because they had overpriced it when they launched, but I also waited till the hackers had jailbroken it. And so it was probably that September, I think, after it came out that I bought my first iPhone. And I used that thing for 4 years, I guess it was, until I replaced it. But I used it on T-Mobile's GPRS/WAP network, which was basically a hack for port forwarding, where it was taking HTTP data and forwarding. It was running everything through port 80 essentially. So any apps or any services that were using another port, the phone was hacked to run it through there. And the reason I did that is because on T-Mobile, that internet service, the bare bones internet service, was $5 a month, and that was all I could afford.
And WAP, for listeners who don't know, WAP and WML were a sort of web application way of providing the internet to feature phones and flip phones.
Yes.
The goal was to be able to reformat web pages for flip phones and be able to use the two yes/no kind of buttons at the top of the flip phone pad.
And the way that the carriers got away with offering that bare bones service was they only allowed one port to go through. And so when you wanted to access services that were something other than a website, they didn't work.
Right, but the traffic was so limited anyway because all you were doing was loading straight HTML, and all of it was machine processed by WebSphere. It was WebSphere machine translation, because WebSphere machine translation ran in the background on a server somewhere at the carrier, and would take the big real web page for the desktop and realize that the requesting device was a flip phone that could only handle monochrome JPEG at the very most, right? And it would suck it in and reformat everything for that tiny device.
Right.
And so I was at IBM in 2000, 2001 and worked on WebSphere, and that's what was running in the background to support WAP for all of those things. And so you only had to open port 80 because that's all of the HTTP traffic.
Right, but non-HTTP services worked when I jailbroke my phone because it forwarded all traffic through it.
Yeah, that was unintentional.
That was unethical is what it was, really. It was not what T-Mobile intended when they were selling me a $5 service. But, at the time I was a year out of college. I had I wasn't making very much money, that's for sure. I couldn't afford, these data plans. It's easy to forget now because everybody just pays for them and that's it. But there was a time where you didn't pay $50+ a month to have a phone with a data plan.
Right. But back then, data was cheap, but voice and SMS were exorbitantly expensive.
No, data wasn't cheap back then. No way. It was like $35 a month to add a data plan on.
Okay, but you were doing your $5 plan.
Yes, I was. That was something I could swallow.
But your voice and your SMS were ridiculous.
Yeah, well, yeah, you had limited minutes. But if you were calling another T-Mobile customer, for example, then they had all these gimmicks and stuff. But yeah, back then you paid for the minutes and you paid for the text messages. Now,
we should clarify. In America, you paid for the text messages. In Europe,
we are talking about the iPhone
was
launch, and it launched first in America. So
yeah, but so there's the whole different market kind of thing, right? In the U.S., voice was cheap and SMS was exorbitant.
Right.
Relatively, let's say. And in Europe, voice was very expensive and SMS was cheap. And so there were a number of European users who got very good at T9 texting input, and Americans never did because the economics never forced us to.
Right, yeah.
And that's why Twitter is limited to 140 characters, is because Twitter initially launched as a service that you would use by posting through SMS, which is the limitation on SMS messages. Mm-hmm. And so there were a number of Europeans in 2007, 2006, and 2007 tweeting using SMS, using T9 text input to do it. And that's the iPhone changed all of this because the iPhone made text messaging easier for Americans. You have a real keyboard. You have a keyboard that adjusts to your input because it's a graphical keyboard instead of a fixed keyboard. You have, and before that, if you were an American and you were doing text messages, you were a BlackBerry user.
How long did you keep your first iPhone as your primary phone?
Not very long, and that was by virtue of my next employer. I worked for Griffin, maker of fine iPhone cases everywhere at the time. Mm-hmm. And at Griffin, I cobbled together a iPhone 3G out of parts that had been dissected to evaluate what was going on inside with the antenna. Because one of the Griffin products back then was a case that you put on your first iPhone, and it passively coupled to the antenna in the original iPhone and gave you better signal strength.
I remember.
It sounds like voodoo, I know, but because they mirrored the exact shape of the antenna in the case as was on the inside of the phone, they passively coupled, and they were able to boost the signal reception of the iPhone.
So you're saying it's better than those stickers that you used to get at a gas station
that
you
same
put
kind
under
of
the battery
theory.
on your flip phone?
It's the same kind of theory, except that those stickers don't match the size and shape of the antenna that's in your phone, so they don't actually work. When you copy the shape properly, it does make a difference.
All right. Well, we don't need to get into antenna gate,
but never mind that. So they'd taken apart on the bench an iPhone 3G to decide if it was worth evaluating and making the product for the 3G. And the result was that it commercially didn't make sense because people didn't buy it exactly because of the gas station commercial. And so they left the iPhone in parts on the bench. And I got crafty one afternoon and went in and reassembled it, and used that phone as my primary phone for
a reassembled iPhone 3G?
Yes.
Got it. So did you at any point, I mean, I know you've dabbled with Android phones for work and stuff over the years. At any point since getting the first iPhone, have you switched your primary phone to be anything other than an iPhone?
I have used an Android phone when traveling. Mm-hmm. I was in Israel for a month last December and a couple of weeks last summer, and I used the Huawei Nexus 6P as the primary phone while traveling.
And was that because it was unlocked and it was easier to get service internationally? What was the justification behind that?
The justification behind that was I could drop a SIM in it and have it work without taking the SIM out of my iPhone. Mm-hmm. I could have used the SIM in the iPhone, but then I wouldn't have gotten calls or messages or iMessages on the American number.
Got it.
So it was a matter of not losing the U.S. communication at the same time. Because see, you don't have this because you're a T-Mobile customer, but if you're
I'm
a
not
Verizon,
anymore, no.
no, but as a Verizon user in the US, all Verizon handsets are unlocked by default.
Yeah.
There are no SIM locks on Verizon handsets. So I could have dropped the SIM in without question. T-Mobile customers in the US, the handsets are locked to T-Mobile, and there are a number of conditions that have to be met for them to consider unlocking them.
Well, when the iPhone first launched, it was locked down. I mean,
oh yeah, they were all well. The iPhone initially launched on AT&T, and
Singular Wireless.
Singular Wireless at the announcement, but
Right.
AT&T by the time it actually
changed
launched.
the branding, yes, by the time it launched.
Well, they got bought. They changed the branding, and then all of the baby bells started getting swallowed up again.
Right. Even though the new AT&T is not the original AT&T, they're actually different companies.
Well, yes, but AT&T. What are you going to do? But you know, it's no longer Bell South. Bell South begat Singular, begat AT&T. Right.
Right.
There's no Mid-Atlantic Bell, or Bell Atlantic, as it were. There's no South Pacific Bell or SBC. Right.
Xfinity.
Yeah. You know, all of these things, they all changed.
Well, it's important for people to remember that the first iPhone, the reason that it was locked down and was on AT&T was because Apple was new to the smartphone business. They had never done anything like this before, and they had a very different approach. Carriers have always had the power. They have the power to put apps on your phone, to put their logo on it, to all that kind of stuff. And Steve Jobs wasn't going to take any of that crap. That just wasn't his style.
Right.
And so in order to get the leverage to be able to do what they wanted with the iPhone, which was ship it without any apps being forced on it, nothing being shoved down the customer's throat, no logos on it from anything other than Apple, they agreed to basically sell their soul to AT&T. And so the irony of it is...
Well, there's a story before that story, actually.
Okay.
So, first of all, at one point, they were considering building their own network. They were considering doing, whether or not to do an MVNO and license bandwidth and lease service from other people, or to just literally build their own network and roll out. That's impractical. It was totally impractical. And at the time in their history, they didn't have the bank that they do now.
That was never going to happen, ever.
There was no practical way to pull that off. They went to Verizon, and they rocked up at Verizon. And at this time, all they had was, barely a prototype.
Right.
It didn't have an iOS as such on it.
They had the Moto Rocker.
Well, no, never mind the Moto Rocker. The Moto Rocker was one of the things that convinced them they had to do this. If you look back at the AppleInsider archives going back to this time frame, you will find that there are a number of rumors back then about touchscreen tablets.
Right. Because that's what they were working on.
And people talked about, well, there were tablets available that were modified MacBooks that instead of traditional MacBook, they'd flipped the screen over and put a Wacom surface on it and turned it into something called a mod book.
Right.
This was not what Apple was building.
No.
Apple was working on building the first iPad. And after the disappointment of the Moto Rocker, they shifted gears and were convinced to build the phone instead.
Right.
But we had the rumors way back then about what this was becoming. So they showed up at Verizon, and the problem is this, right? You show up for a meeting at the cell phone company, and you're meeting these executives and trying to talk to them about taking your handset, and it's not just like talking to the buyers who shop accessories and stock accessories into the stores. You're meeting, high-powered people, and they wear suits, and you're from Southern California, and you show up in T-shirt and jeans. There's already a culture clash. And the ability to not be taken seriously, especially when your phone prototype isn't running your final OS, so you don't have a whole lot to really demonstrate.
But let's be clear. Telecoms are the worst. This wasn't just a culture clash. This is a culture of crummy companies. That's what it is.
Fair enough. But so they showed up at Verizon, and Verizon said, first of all, your stuff doesn't even work.
Right.
Second of all, you've got nothing to demonstrate to us that we can actually see. And third of all, you're not taking us seriously. You're in T-shirts. And fourth of all, you're not going to give us any kind of control or branding on the phone. Every Verizon phone sold had the Verizon branding on it, and we're not going to put that on there? Take a hike. Get out of here. So they went to AT&T. And AT&T, despite them rocking up in T-shirts, despite them showing up without anything to demonstrate, because even as recently as December, before the January keynote, they did not have enough iOS built to demonstrate for the carrier. It was that down to the wire. They were still showing, I think, the sort of testing kind of thing, and saying, look, it's going to be a phone. And they got AT&T to agree to no branding. They got Singular, rather, to agree to no branding. But by the time the phone had launched, Singular was gone, and the executive that had been on stage for the keynote in January was no longer even at Singular. He didn't make it to the AT&T transition.
It happened kind of accidentally, but everything worked out for the best for Apple, because not only did they get control of the platform and really get to stand out in a certain way that other companies just didn't have the leverage to do, and of course they had to sell their soul in order to do that, and they were stuck with AT&T for forever, but also because they were with AT&T, it was a GSM phone, which meant that as they did their international expansion, it worked well, because if they had started out partnering with Verizon, they would have had to completely redo the architecture of the phone in order to do international expansion, because Verizon runs on CDMA, and that's not really a very popular wireless form factor, frequency, whatever you want to call it.
I think there are like 4 countries that use that kind. It's so that's code division multiplexing. Right. Is what CDMA stands for.
And so Verizon is unique in that way that they run something that almost nobody else runs. And so by actually partnering with AT&T, that allowed Apple to very easily roll out internationally as they started to launch the iPhone in more countries as the years went on. And so that's why it was a big deal when the iPhone first launched on Verizon, not until 2011. That was the first time that you could actually use an iPhone on Verizon, because unlike myself, jailbreaking and running on T-Mobile, because T-Mobile was a GSM network, there was no version of the iPhone that had hardware compatibility with Verizon. Apple had to make and redesign the entire internal of the phone to have a CDMA radio in it. So
they had to go to Qualcomm, because Qualcomm owns a lot of the patents around CDMA.
Right. So the irony of it is, by partnering with AT&T, it worked out very well for Apple, because all the carriers internationally that run on GSM, it was very simple for them to get the right frequencies and to launch on their networks. And if they had gone with Verizon, who knows, revisionist history, but things could have gone very differently. It could have been a major technical hurdle for them to expand internationally and to make 2 models of the iPhone, especially with the position the company was in. And you got to remember, the first year of the iPhone, that first generation model, they only sold like 1 million in that first year. It didn't really take off. So, if they had to make more aggressive moves at the start there, it could have been a very different picture, and we could be having a very different conversation right now.
Yeah. So the thing to know, I mean, there's 2 things I want to do. First, I want to ask you, what were your core applications and core uses of the iPhone as it first launched?
Well, for me, there was a lot of tinkering with it, because I bought it the day that the jailbreak and T-Mobile hack were announced. So I went to the AT&T store, I brought it home, and they hadn't streamlined the process. So I had to SSH from a Windows computer. They didn't even have it available for Mac at that point. I had to SSH from a Windows computer, type in some terminal commands to hack it, break it open. And so a lot of my experience with the first year of the iPhone, because you got to remember, the App Store didn't launch until the summer of 2008 when the 3G launched. So there was no App Store for that first year. So a lot of my experience with the iPhone was actually messing around as developers started to create their own unofficial third-party apps. I know that jailbreaking years later developed a reputation for people just stealing apps from the App Store, but in the beginning, it was a very exciting time. And one of the first apps that I installed on my phone that I would show to people and was really impressive was, and this is going to get really confusing because there's a different version of the Microsoft Surface now, but back then, Microsoft announced a product called the Surface that was a big table.
Coffee table.
And one of the demos that they had that people were really excited about was the use of multi-touch, where they had photos on the table and they were like showing them off, and you could resize them and slide them around. And so some very enterprising developer that was early on in the iPhone and in the jailbreak community made an app before the App Store was out that replicated what they did on the Microsoft Surface table. And it was simple. I mean, now you think about it and it's like, well, that's stupid. But at the time, it was like mind-blowing. And so I had photos that I had taken, and they were all just kind of laid out on the screen like they were on a table. And you could slide them around and then pinch and expand and make them bigger or smaller. And I mean, it was such a small thing, but it was just so cool. And then another one was somebody made one of those, those labyrinth games where you got like a marble and you got to roll it around. around. Somebody did that with the gyroscope on the phone, and it was a very rudimentary thing. But and so not only did I have an iPhone, but I was doing things with an iPhone that other people couldn't do. So I had a lot of fun, modifying things, adding wallpaper, even like putting the T-Mobile logo up in the corner and stuff like that. Things that you weren't supposed to be able to do.
Yeah, and that's what people did. So back then, there was a time when people liked to add ringtones or liked to create ringtones.
Right.
And Apple even created a ringtone maker within iTunes that honestly I wish they'd kept. I wish they'd never taken that out of iTunes because that was pretty cool. They sort of later shoehorned it into GarageBand and it got worse. They had this was a time when people liked to theme and customize things. My phones before the iPhone were a Sony Ericsson T616, which I bought because it said it worked with iSync, and it did. And I was able to change the wallpaper to look like the OS X 10.3 wallpaper.
But that kind of novel stuff was exciting at the time because all this technology was new. It was like...
and so
you'd never be able to do anything like that.
People downloaded the Big Boss repo or Cydia for iPhone jailbreak just to be able to load themes.
Right.
Now, what I wanted to get to was that the iPhone deserves some credit for another point, and people don't really think of this a whole lot. People don't really say this out loud a whole lot. And that is, we've had 10 years of this thing, right? And in 10 years, ignoring jailbreaking, there has been no widespread malware that has affected this thing. Mm-hmm. There have been exploits, right? There have been some exploits that we've talked about that law enforcement, for example, likes to use against specific phones.
But they have to have physical access to the phone, so...
Right, but there have been occasional thing, right? There's been a worm here or one there. But
there have been apps that have been compromised.
Mm-hmm. But there's been no widespread crippling malware vulnerability.
Yeah, I mean, the worst thing that you have on the iPhone that happened, and it was really just sort of something that people did as a joke, was there was a string of characters that you could send via text message that would crash the phone. And that was, 3 or 4 years ago or whatever it was. And that went around and it was patched almost immediately, but it was like something people did to like prank their friends, like, haha, gonna crash your phone here. But I mean, that's really the worst of it that I can think of.
I mean, we talk about computers, and when we talk about computers, we talk about traditional computers. And there's been viruses for years, worms and Trojans for years. The latest thing has been this terrible thing where like WannaCry or the other one where they encrypt your data.
Right.
And then ransomware it back, right? And the iPhone and other iOS devices have not been afflicted with anything like that in 10 years of history. That's incredibly noteworthy, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
We've talked in the past about how this is the future of computing and how Apple sees it as the future of computing. And the idea that your device is, not to make too much of it, but let's say nearly impervious, right? So far is pretty incredible.
I mean, I think that alone is, I mean, you can talk about all the things that the iPhone changed, and it changed a lot of things. But I think that the security of the platform and the ease of use, it is something that we will feel for decades to come because, we've talked about, like how I want to get more on the iPad. I want to be exclusively computing on the iPad. I've been pushing my parents to just use their iPad because I know it's a secure platform. When I go on their Windows computers, I don't know what they've installed, and I got to fix things, and they end up with, all kinds of junk on there. Even to this day, with as much better as Windows has gotten compared to the XP days and stuff. And it's still like, I tell my parents, I got my dad the new $330 iPad, and I got him a keyboard. It's like, please, just stick on this. I know you can't screw it up. You're not going to install anything that bad. Well, you're not gonna break anything. You're not going to get hacked. You're not going to have... It really, Neil, it's a game changer
Neil,
for
if you
computing.
Put them on Windows 10 on the whatever starter version they call it, that only allows them to install applications from the Microsoft Store.
Yeah, great.
Won't they similarly be okay?
I think they're still on Windows 7. I told them not to upgrade because I didn't feel like explaining to them how Windows 10 worked because they don't do very well with change. So, Yeah, I mean,
okay, so you can't give them an iPad instead. I got it.
So my dad has an iPad, and I keep telling my mom to get an iPad. I'm like, Mom, your life would be so much easier with an iPad, because they just don't like because they don't, you think about what computers are for now, right? The Mac, the PC, whatever. It's power user stuff, right? And you wonder how many people are on a computer using keyboard shortcuts. I use them. I'm command tabbing, and I'm command T to open a new tab in a window, and I'm whatever else you're doing, right? You got all these keyboard shortcuts. Copy paste type stuff, whatever. How many people use computers and don't even know that exists?
Many.
Well, most of them, probably. And those are the kind of people who, for them, an iPhone and iPad is a better computer. And even for somebody like me.
Wait. Stop the train for a second.
Sure.
Aren't you concerned about iOS 11 and the changes that brings to iPad for your parents who don't like change?
No, because it's still operates generally the same way. So I think that the intuitive nature of iOS makes it so there's not a lot.
I'm thinking specifically about the dock.
Yeah. So the dock is just, think about it, right? So if you have a dock now, it still operates the same way. The apps stay down there. In iOS 11, the dock is there. You can swipe up to access it, and you can do these multitasking features. But if you don't use any of that, you just press the home screen, and there's apps in the dock. Just tap on them, and they open.
All right.
I don't see it being that big of a deal, but that's what I like about the growth of iOS, and you see these features coming out now. Let me take the same question I asked you about, copy and paste and command tabbing and all that. How many people on an iPhone know about for example, control center, swiping up from the bottom of the screen? Do you think most people use that, or do you think most people do not?
I feel like that is a 70-30 split.
Yeah.
Because there are a number of people that I've seen use it that I would have been, that I was honestly surprised.
Yeah.
And they were using it for do not disturb, for rotation lock,
flashlight,
and music.
Flashlight's a popular one.
Flashlight's a popular one.
But yeah, the thing is, and I agree with you, I think more people are using it on an iPhone and even an iPad because it's more intuitive than a keyboard shortcut. However, there are probably a significant, I would love to see Apple's internal data on this, because they've got stuff on this, right? I would love to see how many of these power user features nobody's using, because for us as power users, we love this stuff. We like it when iOS 11's coming, they have a dock and the multitasking and all that. It's great. But the number of people that use it as they get more of these power user features is going to be, as diminishing returns in many ways. So I find that very fascinating, and I find it exciting as they grow this. But for a lot of people, I don't even think it matters.
Yeah. This is that they have data on this, right? That's why Dashboard has kind of gone by the wayside on the Mac.
Right.
No one was using it but me.
Yeah.
And I have to say, we've sort of been talking around all of this, but for me, this particular episode is kind of a love letter to Andy Grignon. Andy Grignon was on the first iPhone team. Mm-hmm. He played a huge role in the first iPhone. He spoke recently with a bunch of other people who developed the iPhone about the development of the original one. He related the story about the drinking game at the original iPhone keynote, where every time a feature worked and it didn't crash, they took a drink in the front row. And he was also the guy that was behind Dashboard on the Mac. So everything we're talking around here, Andy was at the center of that. And I think he said recently that the first iPhone was the reason that his marriage failed. It's a huge thing trying to push out a revolutionary product like that. And, we shouldn't forget the developers that were behind it, the people that really gave serious parts of their lives to this whole kind of thing. We're benefiting from this as users, but it's there is definitely a large number of humans making it come together.
And it's not just the software, it's the hardware. There were so many different pieces that had to come together to make this the game changer that it was and still is in so many ways. I think the irony of it is, after 10 years, the feature that is now less important than ever on the iPhone is the fact that it's a phone.
Oh, yeah. And, that was when I asked you which features caused you to purchase the original thing, the visual voicemail was my...
See, I didn't get that. I
No, you
couldn't
didn't
get that
have
because
that.
that was AT&T. Yeah, yeah.
But visual voicemail, I took one look at that and realized that I could fast forward through messages and that I could listen to them asynchronously. I would never have to press 4, 7, or 9 again in my life. 4 was delete message, 7 was reverse message or rewind, and 9 was fast forward to the next message. Mm-hmm. To not have to ever deal with that again and be able to see who had called and take them in the order that I wanted to was hugely important to me.
I had never even owned a smartphone before the iPhone. So for me, just the ability to text people without having to do the T9 texting was pretty awesome. And obviously the ability to browse the web from wherever was incredible.
Oh, I had 2 different
maps.
Nokia Symbian. I'd been doing smartphones for a little while.
The first iPhone didn't even have GPS, but it could triangulate your location through cell towers. So I remember I was visiting New York and I didn't know how to navigate the subways, and it still knew exactly where I was, even though it didn't even have GPS in it. I mean, it was game changing. Oh,
I used that to navigate from the middle of nowhere in Virginia. So I went on a road trip. I had 2 weddings in the same week. Not my own, obviously. I went to a wedding in Ohio. And then while I was in Ohio, a friend from high school said, "Hey, I'm getting married. Can you come?" And so I'd driven up there carpooled. So I rented a car on the way back and drove into the middle of nowhere in Virginia. Literally, I miles away from any major road. And the directions for getting there were, go down this road, then turn on this dirt road, then turn on this trail and cross a railroad track, and you'll know when you've gone 2 miles, you've gone too far kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I got there, and they had the wedding, and we all went out to dinner, and that was kind of it. It was a very small thing, very on the fly. And so then I'm driving back in the middle of the night, no earthly idea where I am, and the only things I've got in the car for tools are the iPhone, the iPhone's compass, and the maps, and there's no signal. And so I'm a blue dot in a sea of graph paper trying to navigate country roads that aren't very well marked. And, county road this and state road that. And state roads are nice because state roads are bigger, but county road that you have no idea where it goes, right? Mm-hmm. And I just kept turning south and east, and occasionally a map would load on the screen, and I'd be holding on to it for dear life. By about 2 a.m., I hit a road that I recognized the number on, and I just stayed on that thing the whole way. And it was 1 lane each way with people's mailboxes right up to the side of the road. And eventually, I got back to civilization. But it was a
lifesaver.
Oh yeah, I don't know. Map reading is a skill that I think has gone by the wayside. Right? We used to have paper maps, and we used to know how to look at them and navigate them. And to be able to do that in the car as a co-pilot, or when I lived in Israel, I drove a scooter, and I would drive to Jerusalem or Haifa or all these places on this scooter, and I had a map, and I would pull it out and read, and then navigate and go. And now no one reads the map; we just have turn-by-turn directions that tell us where to be.
Could you go back to navigating with a paper map?
I could. But I think there's a whole generation of people that will have no idea.
So there's, we talk about all the industries that were shaken up and things that are gone because of the iPhone. There's one I never thought of. The companies that would print paper maps for AAA.
Well, maps like the AAA maps or Rand McNally. Remember Rand McNally? Mm-hmm. These companies were map makers, but I don't know that they were ever considered especially valuable, right?
Right.
But companies like Navigon, TomTom,
yep.
Nokia, who had all that map data, mm-hmm. that became hugely valuable. Google didn't want to pay for any of that map data, so they went out and they mapped the world on their own, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Apple still licenses from TomTom and companies like that for their maps data.
Apple still licenses from TomTom, even though they're also now driving the world. The value of maps went up immensely. Nokia's maps sold to that conglomerate of car owners, right? Car manufacturers. Mm-hmm. I think Mercedes was among that list. Whoever thought that maps would become that important, but it has.
I've got my first iPhone in my hand here, and when I pull up maps, aside from being astonished that it can actually get my location, even though it doesn't have a GPS. And by the way, I charge this thing 4 days ago, and it's still at 60%. So that's pretty impressive. I mean, it's not like I've been doing much with it, but the one thing is if you zoom,
but it's a 10-year battery too. So
yeah. If you zoom at just the right level where it's out enough, but in that they have enough of like landmarks and whatever, the low resolution screen is so bad, and like you literally cannot read these fonts. They're so bad. You zoom in a little, it gets bigger, and then it's fine. But there's a certain size that it just doesn't work. But pinching and zooming and loading the data and all that, I mean, it still works. I mean, it's still the same basic experience. Here we are 10 years later. And, it's just as impressive when you think about it compared to what was there before as it was then. I mean, it's here it is all on this first device right in my hand.
Yeah, and you're using the Google Maps data there too, which eventually Apple went to war with Google over.
Yeah, but it's got my actual location down to, it even has the privacy thing. I just tap to get my location. It says Google Maps would like to access your location. And it's like, it's got me right on my street corner. It's got everything here. It's really impressive.
What you ought to do, Neil, you ought to put a SIM card in that thing and use it as your primary phone for a week.
So that's the problem. First of all, I think that AT&T stopped supporting the first iPhone, like with whatever data it was connecting
2G
to.
network.
But also, the SIM cards are no longer that full size. They're micro SIMs.
They're adapters. Come on.
I'm sure that there are adapters. What I could do is bring it with me and keep my iPhone and my primary iPhone in my pocket, and then just tether this to it. I could do it like
fancy iPod Touch.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that's all you really need is just a data connection for it, and you can do whatever you want.
Well, it won't get SMS because it doesn't have iMessage.
That's true. That is true. I would lose all my text messages. That would be very difficult to do.
I'm saying. Cool. Well, let's keep going here. I'm going to do a quick ad read. I want to let you all know about Shutterstock. Support for today's show comes from Shutterstock. Every business needs high-quality images to attract and keep customers. And whether you're making brochures or advertisements or putting the final touch on your next tweet, the visuals that you choose are proven to make a big difference. Get started today with a 20% discount at shutterstock.com/AppleInsider. We should talk a little bit about Qualcomm.
Okay.
So Qualcomm has demonstrated an under-display ultrasonic fingerprint sensor that they are saying will be ready for consumer devices for use in the summer of 2018. That is next summer.
Yeah.
And so these are fingerprint sensing devices that work under the display on the front. They work under aluminum and glass on the back. They can be used in any kind of orientation there. That the details are that it has to be through either 650 micrometers of aluminum or 800 micrometers of glass, and will work under 1200 micrometers of OLED display. Each use of material gets a slightly different sensor, but the thickness of the material matters in order for it to be read through. It can also detect heartbeat and blood flow. So you can see, is the fingerprint real? Is it a live fingerprint? And also you could pick up, medical information out of it if you needed to. Qualcomm says that they're using a trusted execution environment, which sounds a lot like Apple's Secure Enclave, but however, it doesn't have to necessarily be encrypted end-to-end. They're going to work with Snapdragon 630 and 660 processors. And Qualcomm has stated that it will support non-Snapdragon platforms as well.
We've seen this before. How many countless times have we seen this? Apple's rumored to be working on something and everybody's rushing to market to get it out before Apple so they can beat it. That's really all this is. They've pre-announced something that is going to come in the summer of 2018. There were some hands-on impressions of this thing this week that said it's very slow. And really all this is Qualcomm reading the tea leaves and just knowing where things are heading and trying to get a jump on it. That's all it is. We've seen this with wearables. We saw it when there was a false alarm with TVs when people thought that Apple was going to make a TV. We saw it with smartphones after the iPhone was announced and people saw what it was, and Android completely changed direction and what it was doing. We saw it with tablets when Apple was rumored to be getting into the tablet business. Everybody was pushing out these tablets. We've seen it over and over and over again. Now you see it with, wireless headphones and stuff too. This is no different. This is the same song and dance that's happened before. The difference is this thing isn't even shipping until 2018, summer of 2018. Apple's rumored to be doing their version of this fall, and none of us know how well it's going to work or what it is until Apple announces it. Not even Qualcomm.
Let's take a different spin on this quickly.
Okay.
Different spin is that people follow Apple and people jump where they think Apple's going to go next, and we end up getting product categories that are totally different than we would have had if people hadn't suspected Apple were going to do this.
Right.
And I think this is a good thing.
No, it's a very good thing. It's funny how transparent it is.
Okay. So
it is Apple dictating things without Apple's name even being mentioned.
Great. Let's move on to the next one. You have a public service announcement. You want to talk about external GPU compatibility.
Yeah, so I was looking into, I would like to get a new MacBook Pro. I would like to mess around with Apple's eGPU capabilities. For those of you who don't know, external graphics cards are going to be supported in High Sierra, but it requires an external monitor because it doesn't have the bandwidth in Thunderbolt to loop it back into the screen on your iMac or your MacBook Pro or what have you. So you have to have this external graphics card powered by Thunderbolt 3, but then you have to have a monitor. There are only 2 monitors on the market right now that are in mass availability that qualify as Retina caliber monitors, and those are the LG Ultrafine monitors, the 21.5-inch 4K and the 27-inch 5K. They're the exact same resolution and size as the iMac. The problem with that is the 21.5-inch is driven by USB-C, and the 27-inch is driven by Thunderbolt 3, and you need to have mini DisplayPort for any reputable
neither of those are DisplayPort or HDMI.
Yep. So if you actually want to use an external monitor, you're actually going to, with the eGPU, you're going to be stuck with a lower pixel density than you would have on the built-in monitor on your MacBook Pro, which seems kind of silly to me to have this gorgeous screen and then not use it.
Right. So what you need is a graphics adapter that has mini DisplayPort on it.
Which, doesn't really
exist. Hold up. Do any of the other adapters have regular DisplayPort on them?
There is no way to get any DisplayPort signal into either of the LG Ultrafine monitors.
You can't do DisplayPort to mini DisplayPort?
They only have USB-C or Thunderbolt 3 input. There is no DisplayPort input on them.
All right. I'm just...
It's frustrating. So, hopefully this is something that the market is going to address going forward. There is a graphics card that it was announced by one company that is going to offer USB-C out, but it is not...
Yeah, the MicroStar one, MSI.
But that is the only one that's been announced. Nobody else has shown much interest in it because it's not the default for monitors. And the ones that are compatible, that do mini DisplayPort or whatever, are 24-inch 4K monitors, which have a pixel density of around 180 pixels per inch, which is considerably lower than the 220 pixels per inch that is Apple's Retina standard on a Mac.
Okay, so the point is wait until this comes together.
Correct. It's in beta until early or spring 2018, the eGPU feature. Wait till there are more graphics cards available. Wait till there are better monitors available. Apple's going to be making their own external monitors. They're getting back into that business. So if you want to dabble right now, there are some nice monitors out there that you could use, but it's not going to be that great of an experience, and it's going to be expensive. You're better off waiting until next spring.
Okay. Logitech Slim Combo Smart Connector Keyboard.
We talked about this a little last week, just to touch on it very briefly. We published our review. I don't hate it. It's not a product for me. If you like to turn your iPad into a laptop and you don't really mind the bulk, that's fine. I don't understand why they have this lip around the outside of the case that goes on the iPad itself. I think they kind of messed up with that. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I think that there's a market of people out there that will really, really like this keyboard and be very happy with it. And if you know those flaws going into it, then I saw some people in the comments were very happy with this product, and then it's the perfect keyboard for them. That's fine. But I think a lot of people will be upset that it adds so much bulk to their iPad and kind of defeats the purpose of the slimness of the device.
Okay, the 2017 MacBook Pro.
Yeah, that just kind of loops back into what we were talking about with the external graphics cards. We published our review this week. Dan tested out the new MacBook Pro, and Max, our video guy, also did some benchmarks and tested them out. The new processors are more powerful than expected from Intel, and they do a pretty good job of boosting and really justifying the redesign, Thunderbolt 3, and all that sort of stuff. So, pretty exciting time for the MacBook, especially these higher end Touch Bar models, and a good time to buy if you're looking for a new Mac.
Okay, the Hover Drone.
Yeah, so Mike did a review for us. I had tested this product out last year as well. It's portable, it folds up, it's cool, it's got a 4K camera. It's good for like taking selfies or something that you want to take with you, like, you're going hiking or something and you don't want to carry a big drone with you. But it's a little pricey at $500. I can't really justify it at that price, and Mike felt kind of the same way, especially with the DJI Spark available now, that's so portable and priced the same and so much more powerful. I think
between Hover and DJI, you're going to buy DJI.
Yeah, I think if they could drop this thing to $300, even $400, it'd be a much better value. Apple's pushing this thing hard. It's an Apple Store exclusive. I was at the Soho Apple Store the other day, and they had a big display for it. It was right next to the DJI ones. I think it's a really cool product. It launched at like $600. And it's just too much money. It's more of a toy, but it's cool. And I think that, if you can get one on discount, it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the Linksys Velop. We've talked about mesh routing before, and, the Linksys Velop is one of the best mesh networking products from a networking standpoint in terms of signal dispersion and signal strength and speed. Mesh networking is the idea that you have two Wi-Fi radios in each node, one to talk to the other nodes to make sure that the signal is distributed properly, and then one side for client radios. Network extenders work by having one radio and switching between talking upstream and talking downstream. Right. And the problem with a network extender is that you can you're cutting your speed in half for all of your clients because of this, and also you end up in situations where you have to manually switch between SSIDs because you have to name them with different SSIDs in order to make sure you're associating with the one nearest to you. If you don't do that, if you name them all with the same SSID, then you end up in situations where you're associated with one that has weak signal instead of switching to the one that has stronger signal. With mesh networking, like Linksys Velop, you keep yourself connected to the strongest one, and you don't lose speed in the process. Linksys had some early teething problems with firmware back in January, but here in June it's a better product. It's a refined product. The firmware is all fixed, and honestly, I was very impressed with it. What I note is that a lot of our readers go back and forth, either not understanding what mesh networking is, not understanding the problems with network extenders, or insisting that they're doing it right when all of the manufacturers recommend settings that say you must really use a separate SSID to make this work properly. Mm-hmm. Because they all know. Now, Apple did extending, but Apple always set it to be the same SSID when they did extend networks, and you just lived with the fact that you might get stuck on the one with weaker signal.
Yeah, I do that with Airport Expresses.
Yeah, and did you ever find you get stuck on a node that has slightly weak signal compared to your nearer one?
Yeah, each one that you add actually halves your total bandwidth, but the truth of that is it doesn't really affect your internet speed. It just affects transfer between devices at home because your internet speed is never as fast as the total bandwidth capability of your router. So,
well, you say that, but when you have gigabit, it does.
Well, I don't have gigabit, so
well, there you go.
If you're lucky enough to have gigabit, then yeah, don't do that. But for most people, it's not going to be an issue.
There you go. So my summary of Linksys Velop is good product. Slightly clunky to set up, and I wish I'd had a few more options. I wish they could have done a few things better. Like, for instance, when you have a provider for your ISP that says you must use their modem and router, and they won't let you turn off DHCP on theirs, then Linksys should have smartly turned off DHCP on their product. And they ask the question and then fail to turn it off. So there's a couple of wrinkles, but for the most part, it's really good.
So I'll just chime in here and say this is a perfect opportunity, Apple. I know that you screwed up a little bit with the Mac Pro. I know that you're getting back into the game there. I know that you're getting back into the monitor game. Let's get you back in the router game. Come on, baby. Let's get a new Airport Express 802.11ac, AirPlay 2. Come on.
How is making routers again going to help their stock value?
No, please. How is making monitors going to help their stock value?
Fair enough.
How is making a Mac Pro going to help their stock value? Just make it.
Have
They're
to
a computer company.
What do they have to prove about making wireless routers again?
Here's what they have to prove. They don't want companies like D-Link making junk that gets people's information stolen or has a botnet created that takes down a third of the internet. Let's have reliable products that we can trust in our homes.
Okay, fair enough. Apple got into wireless because Cisco was making it too hard. They got out of it because everyone else had made it easy enough. Your proposition is they get back into it to make security better.
They never left it. They still sell these products. They're just not updating them. They have to maintain a certain level of quality that you expect. Setting up routers is a nightmare. It still is for most people. People go buy these Linksys routers that are junk.
The setup on these is not that hard. If you follow the steps in the app, it takes a few minutes and you end up with a setup that works.
Okay, but
the ease has been solved. For the most part, it's the security that you're right about.
How many people do you think are running the junk router built into their cable modem provided by Comcast or Time Warner?
Unfortunately, everyone.
Exactly. Fix that. You're letting crap companies take over.
You got to fix that by no longer by buying the providers of those modems to the cable companies.
I'm just saying
you end up buying Motorola and Pace and oh god. All right.
I'm just saying there's a problem in that market and it needs to be fixed, and that is where Apple could step in. Don't abandon the router market. It's a junk market right now with junk companies pushing their crap on people, and people are having bad experiences. Apple should stay in the market because they are in the business of making things simple and reliable and trustworthy.
All right. On that note, I want to thank Neil Junk Hughes for being on the episode 127 of the Apple Insider podcast.
Yes, sir.
Neil, where can we find your junk on the internet?
Well, hopefully my junk isn't on the internet, but you can find my musings on AppleInsider.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at thisisneil, Neil. There will be no junk pictures on there, ladies.
I am so sorry.
Hate to disappoint.
I am so sorry.
That's all right.
I'm Victor Marks, and you should check out taperight.com/@scout or Scout Tech Podcast on iTunes. It's a very cool one. Neil and I are on it. You should listen. This has been Apple Insider episode 127, and we will see you back next week.